Okay, so this video is going to be a little bit different to the videos that I normally do. Rather than it being a few slides summarising a topic area, it's actually going to be the lesson that I'm going to be delivering later on this week. So for those students that are in my Year 11 class, if you were unable to get into school for whatever reason, then this would be a good opportunity to try and catch up. For those people who are in the lesson but want to challenge themselves, really make sure that they understand what happened during that lesson, it's a good opportunity to watch the video again. So the question I've got at the top of the slide is, what is the benefit of good market research? Everyone in Year 11 should really know the answer to this. The benefit of good market research is linked to customer needs. So the point is, what's the benefit of good market research? You find out what your customer needs are. And then the challenge, how would you turn this into a 3 mark? If you know what your customer needs are, then you can create products which meet those customer needs. This should lead to increased revenue, increased sales, increased market share, competitive advantage. So that would be the way that we would link it. But always, any question which is along these lines about market research, the benefit is that you find out what your customers want. The story I've got on the right hand side is linked to this. It's about Fitbit. Fitbit did know what customers want. It was meeting customer needs. It was giving them technology that could tell them how many steps they were doing each day, how active they were. It was linked through Bluetooth to your phone, so it would tell you about text messages coming in or phone calls coming in. But Fitbit started in the last year to not really understand what their customers wanted, not move with those customer needs. What that meant was that Apple and that iWatch had overtaken Fitbit in terms of wearable technology sales, and so Fitbit went from number 1 actually to number 3 because an organisation called Xiaomi based in China, they took the number 2 spot. What Fitbit are doing through market research is responding to those needs. They've realised that customers want to be able to download apps which aren't already pre-installed onto the watches, and so this new watch is going to be able to use the App Store for both Android and also Apple, and it will also be able to use Windows applications. It will make the watch a lot more have a lot more functionality so that people can use the watch in the way that they want. Maybe they're fitness fanatics and they need loads of those apps. Maybe it's more work related, so they want apps that help them organise themselves. But Fitbit are hoping that they might be able to regain number 1 spot again through good market research and meeting those customer needs. Obviously, these are the sort of learning journey that we're on, so if you were in the lesson or weren't in the lesson, then please have a quick look at them. For the students who are in my class, this is where we're up to at the moment. Now, this lesson is specifically about linking the product life cycle to cash flow. This is a picture from BBC Bitesize, and it's about cash flow. So money coming in can come from investors, capital from sales. Cash flow going out can be wages, expenses, bills, and what's left, the difference between money coming in and money going out, is what is our net cash flow. So in the lesson, students, you will have done this, and I will have asked you to think about, give me a few inflows, a few outflows. For those people taking the exam this September, this question comes up a fair bit. It's a really easy question to score marks on. It could come up as a multiple choice question where they will just give you a few, say 3 outflows and 1 inflow and ask you to pick the inflow. Or it might be that they ask you to identify 3 inflows for a business or 3 outflows for a business. If it does that, you need to be specific. So make sure this is part of your revision for cash flow. Obviously, this lesson isn't about cash flow. This is just to recap some of the key themes so we can talk about how it links to the product life cycle. These are some of the inflows and outflows that a business might have. It's normally easier to come up with the outflows than it is with the inflows because there aren't as many. Our major inflow is the things that we sell. That generates our sales revenue. But other investments, so whether we have loans, whether we get grants, or whether we have money from friends and family, there can often be other inflows. The outflows are all of our expenses, our bills which are connected to making the products. A positive cash flow is when we've got more inflows than outflows. And a negative cash flow is when we've got more outflows than inflows. So you should all be familiar with this cash flow and the product life cycle diagram, showing us that over time products are introduced, sales start to increase, then they go through the growth phase where we have this rapid increase in sales, then we reach the maturity phase where sales start to level off, and then after a certain amount of time the product will become less popular and we'll start to see a decline in sales. Now, in previous lessons we've talked about extension strategies. For today we're just trying to look at how cash flow links with the product life cycle. So first of all, although this phase is not on our product life cycle and we don't need to know it for the exam, before you can introduce any product you have to have spent money on research and development. You can't just conjure a product out of thin air. You might have spent years trying to work on this new product, and all of that time there will be a cost. The money is pouring out of the business when you're paying staff's wages, you're buying materials, doing experiments, whatever it may be to start to develop that product. And this phase is the research and development phase. So it doesn't take a massive leap to understand that during that phase, the research, the costs, the salaries, we've just got money going out, and therefore we have a negative cash flow. And this negative cash flow continues on into the introduction and the early growth phase. We've got expensive advertising costs. The product has been launched, it's got past that research and development phase, but now we've got to make people buy it. We have to make people aware that the product exists, and the only way that we can really do that is through advertising, and advertising is expensive. Don't get lulled into the trap or fall into the trap of believing that you can advertise via Facebook or you can advertise via YouTube and that this is not an expensive means of advertising. Maintaining Facebook pages, creating YouTube videos which go viral is still very, very expensive. And so whether it's traditional advertising or more modern advertising, the cost is still very, very high. As a result of that, during this introduction phase, we will have more money going out of the business than we've got coming in through sales. As we move in towards the growth phase, what we start to see is that we get money coming in. We do have inflows, but the inflows aren't very high, and the outflows are much higher, which we still see this negative cash flow. As we go a bit further into the growth stage, we still probably have a negative cash flow. We're still having to advertise the business, but we are seeing sales start to pick up, and we might start to get a bit of a neutral cash flow where inflows and outflows meet each other and are equal. And then towards the top end of the growth phase, what we should see is that we get this positive cash flow. Sales are starting to peak. Advertising costs don't need to be as high, because rather than people needing to find out about the product for the first time, maybe there's good word of mouth, people are aware of the product, maybe the media are starting to write about it a bit more. It's become that people know that the product exists, and so maybe we can start to reduce the advertising budget. As we move into the maturity phase, we'd hope to see that we've just got a positive cash flow. The costs for the business are very, very limited at that point. Other than producing the product, we shouldn't really need to advertise it. And as a result, we should start to see this positive cash flow. It should be sales coming in and very little money going out. As we enter the decline phase, potentially we might still see this positive cash flow. As a product starts to peter out, we may do nothing to advertise it anymore. We may just let it die gradually as it goes out of fashion. But during that time, the costs of the business, in terms of advertising, we just wouldn't put that back into a product that we know is declining potentially, and so we should hopefully during this decline phase still see some positive cash flow from the sales of these products. It's a popular exam question to ask you to pick about 2 different extension strategies, maybe advertising or changing features, and ask you to pick which would be the most appropriate. Now, bearing in mind that we understand that cash flow changes over the time of the product life cycle, if you've got to the evaluation phase of a 6, 8 or 10 marker and you're trying to consider, well, what should an organisation do, cost is really, really important. So for example, in that maturity phase, you could create a new advertising campaign. The thing is though, you have got positive cash flow because you have got a very low inflows. So the only reason to create an advertising campaign in that maturity phase is if you believe that sales will increase in a greater proportion than the investment in the advertising campaign. Otherwise, it's not worth it. Equally, if you're going to bring out new features, change the product slightly, bring out a new colour scheme, whatever it may be, the only reason to do that is if the investment that you put into creating the new features or the new colours, whatever it might be, is actually going to generate more sales than the investment that you put in the first place. So a good sentence might be, I believe that the extension strategy of creating new features is the best strategy. However, this is only a good strategy if the costs involved in creating those new features are recouped by a greater increase in sales. If sales do not increase enough to cover those costs, then this is a bad idea and the product should be allowed to decline naturally. That would be the kind of answer that you're looking for there. One of the things I'm going to ask you to do on the next slide, the purple zone slide, is to ask you to think about the impact of time in relation to particular industries. What I'd say now is the next activity is a purple zone activity that I'd like you to do without actually using any of your notes. So if you weren't clear about what this slide is telling you, maybe rewind the video a few minutes and watch this little section again. So the purple zone activity, for those people who weren't in the lesson, this is about cash flow in the product life cycle and how to write about product life cycle and cash flow. It asks you to think about what costs exist before introduction, what does this mean for cash flow. So I'm just going to leave you to try and write a couple of paragraphs, 2 or 3 paragraphs about cash flow and the product life cycle. The challenge down here, as I said a couple of seconds earlier, was that try and think how time is important when selecting an extension strategy for technology or the fashions industry. Think about the importance of extension strategies which allow you to do things quickly. With fashion and with technology, extension strategies are all great as long as they happen quickly. Can you tell me why that's important? So finally, an exam practice question about Cocoa Fusion. It's a new product which is launched in the UK recently. It's the first all-natural carbonated coconut water. Apparently coconut water is going to be the big thing in the UK. The sales are going absolutely crazy amongst, at the moment, mainly those people who are interested in health. However, in the next, as we start to see that market, the target market expand and more people be interested in coconut water, then the sales may start to rival more popular drinks that we've heard of. So this question is a describe question as it's highlighted here. So as soon as we see describe, it could be 3 or 4 questions, 3 or 4 marks. This one is described for 4, and it says describe how Cocoa Fusion's cash flow is likely to change as Cocoa Fusion moves from the introduction to the maturity phase of the product life cycle. Now, in the previous purple zone activity, you've probably written quite a lot, but this is an exam question, so what we're trying to do is write in such a way that we can score the marks, but that we can do it quickly. So what you're trying to do is think about what you've written previously, but try and make it so that it's perfect for a 4 marker. I've got the exam rubric here for a 4 marker. There's 2 ways to answer a 4 marker really. You can write 4 separate points. You don't need to link your points. If you can come up with 4 separate points to answer the question, then that works. You can also get 1 mark for a definition. So you could start off with a definition. I suppose in this case a definition might be of cash flow or product life cycle, and then maybe do 3 separate points. The best way to score is to avoid the definition and to avoid 4 separate points. That's quite challenging activity. Think of 2 points and then develop them. So, for this question, think about, in terms of Cocoa Fusion, what will happen in the introduction phase and what is likely to change cash flow wise as they go into the maturity phase. In order to try and get the points developed, make sure you are using full sentences. Think about your connectives, this leads to, as a result of. So you're looking for 2 sentences to talk about cash flow in the introduction phase and 2 sentences to talk about cash flow in the maturity phase, and that should be enough to get you the 4 marks. Well, thank you very much for listening to the video. I hope it's been really useful. If you have done this activity at home, then next time in the lesson we'll look at the mark scheme and we'll work out how you could have got exactly 4 for this, and hopefully you did, and we can do a little bit of green for growth. Any questions, then do pop by and see me in the annex.